My first encounter with the word Swaraj was through Professor Samdong Rinpoche, one of my revered Buddhist teachers. I remember it was 11 years ago in a workshop we led with some Tibetan youth, where he shared that how important and seminal is the text of In Swaraj as equal to any Buddhist text, or rather even more relevant. That was my first formal introduction. My own personal journey, maybe I can draw some inkling to Swaraj even before I encountered this formal term Swaraj through Gandhiji, was when I was pursuing my bachelor's degree in Bombay and in philosophy. I always felt some sort of as if I was not fitting into the system, and naturally that the system makes you feel like you're a failure because you're not fitting in. So, like for example, the choices I made after graduating from 10th from a elite school in Bombay, gaining very high marks. I was getting entry into one of Bombay's best colleges, Xavier's, in science stream, and it all seemed like the right thing to do. I did that for 2 years and I left that program and I joined for a humanities program in philosophy. And that did not seem the right thing to do, because in my class of philosophy there were 100 girls and only 3 boys. And it was very kind of underlining assumption that you join philosophy so you get married, just get a degree. There is no kind of, there's nothing about philosophy. It is all about getting a degree and you get married, And it seemed like a stereotypical choice for women. And it kind of very strange for me. But I was very lucky that I had this professor who was a hippie in the 60s in America, a Gujarati poet. And he told me, Prashant, in 3 years what you'll get, you rather go do 10 days Vipassana at Goenkaji's in Igatpuri. You'll get more out of that than 3 years of formal philosophy. And he said, don't worry about attendance, everything I'll handle. So that gave me a lot of freedom, that somebody who's giving me this, actually recognizing something of not fitting in and seeing a value in that. So in that 3 years, I started film clubs, I was doing different things, teaching swimming to children, started a Free Tibet group in Bombay. So that kind of strengthened my whole resolve that there is something valuable in not fitting in. And from there, after that I got involved with some Buddhist groups, started reading more about Buddhism, spent a year, again very unconventional choice, raised a lot of eyebrows in my family, friends. I spent a year on a scholarship working with a Buddhist network in Thailand, which was largely spending time with indigenous tribals in northern Thailand and with forest Buddhist monks who were raising some ecological awareness. So that again, from an Indian point of view, Thailand, Karen tribes, what is all this? You want to do something alternate, why don't you go to US or Europe, The East doesn't fit into our kind of geography as a valuable experience. So then from there I came back and, just giving some sort of sense of how I continued with this unfitting in. I had some pressures to enroll for a formal degree, being the only child, that you want to do something alternate but get a master's degree. So I joined this program in Delhi University, Jamia Millia, master's degree in film, mass communication. Again, very privileged, sought out course, 10,000 apply, 20 seats. So I got into that. It's a 2.5 year program. Again, I did not fit in there with the administrative requirements of attendance, operation, control, whatever they employ. And at the same time, the contradiction is they want you to become socially engaged filmmakers. So it was funny that after 2 years I had problems with that and I walked out of that program. And because I realized that to be a filmmaker, why do I need a degree? And so anyway, my feeling now of how I see Swaraj is connected to my life. I don't see Swaraj as necessarily, Swaraj also means, from Gandhiji's point of view, Swaraj at a social, cultural level of a village-based, self-reliant model of development. Yes, I totally relate to that. But to myself, Swaraj means being honest to myself, being daring, being courageous, and embracing choices which may totally seem absurd from conventional point of view, which may make us feel we are not fitting in. you know, and that is about walking something. It seems like sometimes like walking on a razor's edge, like say with the Buddhist path. There is a sense of daringness about not bothering about the material world, not bothering at conventional norms, conventional values, even morality for that matter, conventional morality. Uh, so that liberating oneself from those traps, I feel, is Swaraj, and reminding myself, you know, there's something beyond this phenomenal world, beyond the so-called phenomenal, what manifests as logic, right thing to do, etiquette, all these ideas, which keep changing actually and are actually driven by so many underlining structures of oppression, control, ideology, and we somehow deceive ourselves thinking, oh, this is universal, this is, how things have been, these are all kind of sophisticated traps. So Swaraj is for me now more about seeing how my mind works and how I relate to, you know, life around me. So that is Swaraj. Moment by moment, kind of staying in that and liberating oneself and the choices one makes, the action one does, the kind of, yeah, just how one thinks about life. At a larger level or at a global level, I feel there is this deep rooted habituated assumption. I mean, it's just not an intellectual assumption, it's emotionally habituated, and it's habituated by many of these structures of education, which kind of communicate values to us, and also then, yeah, it gets, it's, it infiltrates us through media, because from education springs all these other structures of mass media, of information, economic structures. And I think one of the assumptions is this kind of, this assumption of fragmentedness, that we are separate, that one is assumption of believing in a fundamental self, and then in the same relationship believing as a fundamental, like a dualistic assumption. So you, at one level, you relate to the planet, the living beings, as separate from you completely, so there is, for example, you can see this happens in schooling, colleges, everything. It's all about strengthening this self idea, the ego, the belief in oneself often becomes, it's a very slippery road. I mean, it has a lot of positive values, believing in the goodness of oneself, and but then the problem is when it's isolated from other beings. So for example, this modern assumption that it's all about yourself, and and you can see that, like, for example, man and nature, and you can see that from a lot of Western philosophical systems, Western scientific system, which today, that's why we are facing this huge ecological crisis that will destroy the planet, is about conquering nature, exploiting nature, because that is stemming from this assumption, which is habituated emotionally, psychologically, that we are separate. There's no connectedness, which has disconnected us from our relationships with human beings, and not just relationships, it's actually interdependence. It's not about, I need to talk to you nicely because it's socially nice or it feels good. No, we both are linked to each other at a fundamental level. Swaraj, sometimes I feel there is too much emphasis on Swaraj at a social cultural level, and we forget that personal. And I feel it only stems from the personal Swaraj. And then with the personal Swaraj, it can manifest totally differently. It could happen in an urban way, it could happen in a rural way. I mean, I don't feel there's any hard and fast rule in present day. I mean, certainly the village has a lot more favorable conditions for a social, economic, cultural Swaraj. But in today's time we are looking at is that can also be created in the city. But it all drives from the personal space within oneself. And I think Deer Park Institute, by providing a window into some of these ancient Indian traditions, which were not about the phenomenal world, which were not looking for, the aim of these traditions wasn't purely about a happy, successful life in the worldly sense, which today we define as, yeah, driven by wealth, driven by, social status. But some of these ancient traditions, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Jainism, whether it's Advait tradition, were always challenging the assumptions. And if one looks back, the gurus and the disciples were breaking assumptions of behavior, assumptions of norms, assumptions of etiquette, assumptions of, so there was a daringness to challenge it, to follow your own kind of what you believe as truthful, and we can see that even from the life of the Buddha. He challenged assumptions. He broke away of that life of luxury, and he did something which at that time was totally, it was radical. And as a student of Buddhism, what I have understood of renunciation is, one is the renunciation of, at a level of making choices for one's body, for one's physical needs, material needs, being aware of what one needs, and then giving up what one doesn't need. That is at one material level. I think at a deeper level, I've understood renunciation is also seeing the futility, seeing the meaningless nature of all these pursuits. Whether it's getting a big job, getting a big salary raise, or whether it's all these social aspirations, which are driven often by, could be driven by desire, driven by greed, and one begins to see how futile they are. It's like an endless cycle. To see that is another feeling of renunciation, because then you can cut this cycle. And the cycle is fed by social, cultural, economic, educational value systems, So it's very easy to get caught in that stream. So I think renunciation is also about that I'm not going to swim in this stream, And the stream is, it may be a huge current, but you can easily step out.